Good afternoon, all. Our Parsha this week is Parshat Bo, seeing clearly as we turn challenges into strengths. I am actually recording this earlier than 1:15. It will be placed wherever it is placed, whenever it is placed there. I'm just dealing with a somewhat erratic schedule as I'm here to help my daughter Tali as she addresses some health challenges. And I do appreciate the concern that so many have shown during this time. So here we go. As this Parsha continues, we find ourselves in the midst of the Makot that struck Mitzrayim. We will begin by focusing on the locusts in Perek Yud. We read, Vayavo Moshe v'Aharon el Paro v'yamru elav ko amar Hashem Elokei Avim ad matai ma'anta la'anot mi panai shalach ami v'ya'avduni. Moshe and Aaron come to Pharaoh and they say, so said God, the God of the Hebrews, how long will you continue to work against me? Let my people go and they will worship me. The Targum renders la'anot, to humble yourself, as deriving from ani in the Onkelos, meaning you have refused to be humble and meek before me. In other words, you continue to hold yourself above me. So I want to suggest that this is an extension of last week's discussion about how we confront challenges and maintain our use of free choice, informed by our understanding of our place in the world. Look at the differences between the reactions of Paro and the reactions of Bnei Yisrael. Then Moshe continues, and Aharon, for if you refuse to let them go, I will bring hineni mavi machar arbe givulecha. I will bring locusts tomorrow, and they will vikisa et ein haaretz. They will cover, they will obscure the view of the earth. V'lo yuchal lir'ot et haaretz, and no one is going to be able to see the earth. They will eat the surviving remnant which remains for you, and they will eat all your trees that grow in the field. Rashi explains, no one will be able to see. In other words, the seer, the one who is looking, who is searching, will not be able to see the earth and where his food or where the resources are. Again, I would suggest this continues to feed into the addict's perception as we spoke last week. In this case, Pharaoh, regarding his own power and its strength or weakness. He will therefore become paralyzed within the framework of the challenge that is now presented. Yeah, locusts are a pain. I remember the 17-year locust from my youth in Maryland very well. But do we see our way through challenges, or do we feel that they threaten our sense of self-importance? When we approach all that we do with a singularity and a singular, egocentric point of view, this too obscures our view of the earth and our place in it. It should be noted also that when we speak of darkness, deserts, as we do in Bamidbar, to be sure, there's a physical level on which these phenomena challenge us. And we will address the physical challenge based on the spiritual deserts and darknesses that confront us as we lose our way regardless of the objective clarity outside of ourselves. The text continues, your houses, the houses of your servants, all, v'chol batei Mitzrayim, will be covered, will be filled. Pharaoh's servants then say to him, how long will this one, ad matai yezel lanu lemokesh, how long will this stumbling block continue for us? Let them go, let them worship their God. Don't you know that Egypt is lost? Hatedaki avda Mitzrayim? Don't you know that this is no longer to our benefit? As Rashi and Rashbam both render this. So again, I want to engage in conversation with our traditional Mefarshim and ask, Can this be the next chapter? Can this be, as we saw the midwives being rebels and rising to resist Paro? Could this be the multitudes also rising and challenging Paro? And again, using the plural and the singular in terms of the unity of those that are citing what they observe. Just as the midwives who were not caught up in the self-proclaimed power of Pharaoh and believed in something greater, could that be the case here as well? Or, alternatively, is this defeat that is felt by those who may not be stuck in their sense of self-importance, be bleeding into the population of Mitzrayim and them feeling the defeatedness as well? Think of our own times and how people accept and put up with so many who proclaim self-importance to the detriment of the collective. Moshe and Aharon, are brought back to Paro. And of course he says to them again, Lech, go, worship the Lord your God. Leave. So remember that part of the perception of this narrative is what cultural anthropologists have taught us about the concept of God in the ancient world, and the notion that there was this territorial concept of deities, that Paro saw it almost as a boxing ring, and when the plague was active, he would see the Israelite God in his perspective, winning in the boxing ring, but then when it left, instead of seeing it as an action of Ribono Shel Olam, the God of all that is, he saw it as the Egyptian deity with whom he was very invested and identified as winning, and therefore did not have to let them go. Moshe then says, with our youth and our elders, we will go. We will all leave. Our sons, our daughters will come with us, our flocks, our cattle. Ki Chag Hashem Lanu. This is a festival to God. In other words, remember, the locusts are there obscuring the view of the Egyptians. The Bnei Yisrael do not seem to be, through this whole narrative, as deterred by the Makot as the Egyptians, as Paro. They keep going on their trajectory during all of this. They will continue to work within the challenge to reach their goal. And this is what they choose, using their Bechei sheet to do. You can't go over it. You can't go under it. They are working through the challenge. There may very well be physical darkness and obstacles galore obscuring their view, but the degree to which the physical darkness is a deterrent is lessened. We know this to be true in our own lives. As we continue in our reading, we come to a later point in the chapter, and God says to Moshe, and here we have the plague of darkness. And the darkness, it says, Vayimash choshech, that it will become, the darkness will become darker. And it will be darker than anything you know, anything that they have ever experienced. Moshe stretches forth his hand, and there indeed is a thick darkness over the land of Egypt, Shloshet Yamim, 3 days. Now, again, note here how darkness can afflict all who cannot see beyond a present challenge, and those who can go beyond the present challenge or respond to a greater or higher impetus or means of support can function within the darkness. Think of a blind person, a person who is not sighted, and how they can maneuver in ways that sighted people simply cannot. So this thick darkness in which they did not see each other for 3 days, according to Rashi, and then there was another 3 days, which was even twice as dark as that. Rashi says that that second dose of darkness is to weed out those amongst the Bnei Yisrael who had joined the Mitzrayim. Remember, We've talked about the Erev Rav, the mixed multitudes. We're not talking about all Egyptians are in this corner, all Jews are in this corner. There's no mixing. There is mixing. Of course there's mixing. We know this to be the case. So Rashi wants here to separate out the Jews that are righteous from those that are not, and sort of cast them into the role or into the lot of the Mitzri. Whether or not we want to do that, that is up to us in terms of how we're looking at the text. But what Rashi is doing is justifying the second statement of the darker darkness. They did not see each other, verse 23. No one rose from his place for 3 days. But for all of the Bnei Yisrael, so now this, for Rashi, this is not consistent, because now it says, Shloshet Yamim, Ulachol Bnei Yisrael haya or b'mashvatechem. And for all of Bnei Yisrael, there was light in their dwellings. Now, this is not a magic trick. We're not thinking there's light here and there's not there, and poof, it's there, or what have you. But again, what kind of light are we talking about? How do people see with the minimal amount of light if they know that what they're going for is something much grander? So we really need to address what type of darkness this is, what type of light. Is this indicative of how one sees, given everything that is going on? Let us think about this on a human level. Note what the Israelites are observing all around them and how they apparently move forward in the text toward their greater goal, their destiny. Now, compare this to later in the text when the Meraglim come back to report on what they observe in the land on their journeys, and they instigate a type of collective paralysis where no one seems to be able to move forward. They get this positive report from Caleb and Yoshua. They get this list of obstacles from the other 10 Meraglim, and this places them in a situation of stasis from which they don't seem to be able to move. Yet here, they are forging their path through all of the makot, through the darkness, through the locusts, through the boils, through everything that happens. We all know that there are so many challenges in our lives. Many of those will be quite daunting, stopping some of us in their tracks while instigating a greater source of strength in others. As Aviva Zornberg explains in her introduction to the particulars of rapture, her examination of Sefer Shemot, she is focused here on the interdependence of seemingly opposite things. In other words, for our purposes here, the darkness perceived by Paro may very well be the light that is perceived by Moshe. Survival may very well be achieved by looking at what can destroy and take away and challenge us and face it and know how to respond. Throughout the narrative of Parshat Vayera from last week and this Parsha, as well as those to come, we will note this irony of the opposites, where opposite reactions will produce different results, though they come as a reaction to the same stimulus. This is not because of the differences in the object to which one reacts, but rather as an outcome of the reaction itself. Thus, our Bechirah of Shit makes a difference. Lest one may cede power to Paro, thus buying into his own self-perception, Zornberg makes it crystal clear that this is not what's going on. It may be perceived as a power struggle in Paro's mind, but in terms of looking in from the outside, she explains, God tells Paro why God has not brought the drama to closure. The need for an explanation is implicit. Why is the narrative so protracted? Why are the plague patterns repeated so frequently and in the same cycle of reactions? The ease of such a denouement is it does not require extraordinary divine resources, but it strengthens the point about God's will. God will keep Paro on his feet for a double purpose, so that He is in a position to witness God's power, and also we need the narrative about God. We are led to understand that the narrative plays out exactly as it should, and Paro does not change, precisely because Paro does not want to change, as we discussed last week. Further, there's the matter of the Egyptians, who are doing what Paro wants them to do. What do they learn from this? Zornberg teaches. In the Midrash, we learn that in order to seduce the Egyptian, they hear, Paro is invincible, for no punishment can touch him. God, therefore, lets Paro survive each of the 10 plagues as a test to the Egyptians. This would be in line with the idea that God is the creator of all and is concerned about all people, and why, until today, we as Jews do not rejoice at the death or the defeat of others. And those that do miss this very important foundational point of who we are as Jews. Zornberg continues, the anomaly of Pharaoh's survival is intended to destroy the Egyptians by confirming their own narrative and their illusions to the very end. Paro is so strong. So they are basically casting their destiny with his. And yet, at the end, we know that God is stronger. As Paro will drown in the sea of reeds as the waters come crashing down on him and his soldiers. The narrative of Moshe and God must be compelling enough for the Egyptians to be able to hold on to their hero until the very end, only to discover that there is another power out there. Remember, Zornberg is also a PhD in English Lit, and she's looking at not just the narrative as within its own context, but also within the larger genre of how we tell a story and how the story progresses and what happens to all of the personae in the story as it progresses. In other words, on an existential level, I would suggest that the Egyptians have their free choice removed by the very one who does not want them to choose, but to follow. Their dictator, Paro. As this narrative continues and intensifies, we see that God, the one who gives free choice, is the one who bestows upon those who wish to use it the ability to do so. However, Paro, who prefers to rule over a gaggle of automatons who will do his bidding, well, different story. We know at this point what will happen to them. Further, we have certainly seen this dynamic operative in our own world today and throughout history. A treasured colleague of mine from many years ago, Rabbi Ephraim Buchwald, amplifies this point for us as we find ourselves returning to the question of how Bechira Chavshit can operate in a world created by and supervised by, if you will, God. Remember that we are operating on 2 planes of action and need to interface those planes as opposed to ignoring any reality besides our own self-perceived one, as is the case with Paro. Rabbi Buchwald states as follows. In Exodus chapter 12, verse 51, toward the conclusion of Parshat Bo, we read the official announcement of the Exodus. Vayhi be'etzem hayom hazeh hotzi Hashem et bnei Yisrael me'eretz Mitzrayim al tzvatam. It happened on that very day that God took the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt in their legions. The exodus of the Israelites from the land of Egypt serves as a universal paradigm for the battle of freedom, and I would suggest an ability to continue to choose for oneself, no matter what situation one finds oneself in. Back to Rabbi Buchwald. This is not only true for the Jewish people, but also for all the nations of the world. Unjustly forced into servitude, the helpless and downtrodden Hebrews were redeemed from their back-breaking slavery by the intervention of God Almighty and God's chosen representatives, Moshe and Aharon. And remember, again, as I've said, This all happens within the context and within the framework of the debilitating plagues that we have read about. Rabbi Buchwald continues, this divine redemption was hardly an accident or a coincidence. In fact, it was a fulfillment of the prophecy made 400 years earlier at the Brit Bein HaBitarim, the covenant between the pieces, where God promised Avram in Bereshit chapter 15, verses 13 through 14, Vayomer la'Avram, Yodei Tedad ki ger yezarecha be'eretz lo lahem, va'avadum v'inu atam arba me'ot shana, v'gam et hagoy asher ya'avdu dan anochi v'charechem yatzu b'rechush gadol. Know that your offspring will be aliens in a land not their own. They will serve those people, and those people will oppress them for 400 years. But also, that nation, the nation that your nation will serve, I will judge them, and afterwards you will leave with great wealth that is yours. So now, how do we bring in the second half of this parsha when we speak about Rosh Chodesh, the calendar, Bikurim, the first fruits, and Pesach? Let's think for a moment about the many chapters in our history when Jews, as well as others, Muslims, people of color, LGBT individuals, so many others, were oppressed and threatened with extinction. What do? We engage in activities by choice that reaffirm and proclaim our identity and carry us through the darkness, physical darkness and challenges, and spiritual darkness and challenges. We engage in activities by choice. In this way, we maintain our bechira chavshit by using our choice to proclaim our identity. And here are ways that the Jewish people will do this: Bikurim, Pesach, Rosh Chodesh, going through the calendar. Further, participation in these experiences strengthen both the individual as well as the collective and identify us to the world. You are free, we are being told, to proclaim your Jewish identity. And here are public and important and tangible ways to do so. Remember your history, Pesach. Pronounce our ongoing relationship to God and appreciation for all that connection has brought us, the giving of Bikurim, the first fruits, and organizing our time so that we know what to do and when to do it, Rosh Chodesh. In Parak Yud Gimel, we see this operative, and it will come to pass, verse 5, that God will bring you to the land of the Canaanim, the Hittim, the Amorim, the Chivim, and the Yevusim, which God swore to your forefathers to give you, Eretz Avat Chalav U'Dvash, a land flowing with milk and honey, Va'avadata et ha'avodah hazot b'chodesh hazeh. And you will perform this service in this month. This lesson of establishing and maintaining one's identity and how it is all about choosing to do is what fuels this comment by Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks, alav shalom, as he points out. Moshe does not talk about freedom or the land flowing with milk and honey or the journey they will have to undertake through the desert. Instead, 3 times he turns to the distant future when the journey is complete and the people, free at last, are in their own land. And what does he talk about? Not the land itself or the society that they will build or even about the demands and responsibilities of freedom. Rather, he will speak about education, specifically about the duty of parents toward their children. He speaks about the things that we do to maintain our generations and our community. He speaks about the questions children may ask when the epic events that are about to happen are at best a distant memory. He tells the Israelites at this point to do what Jews have done from then to now. V'higata levanecha. Tell your children the story. Do it in a maximally effective way. Reenact the drama of exile and exodus, slavery and freedom. Get your children to ask questions. Make sure that you tell the story as your own, not as some dry account of history, which is disconnected from us. Say that the way you live and the ceremonies that you observe, Rosh Chodesh, Pesach, Bikurim, and the many other things we do, are because of what God did for me. Not just my ancestors, but for me. Make it vivid, make it personal, make it live. In other words, we are being told, use our choice to teach, to experience, to identify. Do not give up the agency God has bestowed upon us. Further, Rabbi Sachs teaches, that narrative provides the answer to the three fundamental questions every reflective individual must ask at some stage in their lives. Who am I? Why am I here? How shall I live? There are many answers to these questions, but the Jewish ones are, I am a member of the people whom God rescued from slavery to freedom. I am here to build a society that honors the freedom of all, not just my own. And I must live in conscious knowledge that freedom is the gift of God. Honor that by keeping God's covenant of law and love. End of quote. And here we have one of the most fundamental lessons of what it means to be a Jew. We often talk about survival, of surmounting unbelievable odds. We choose and we balance that choice with discipline as dictated by God so that all can choose, and that one person's choice never is to remove the choice of another, as in the case of a full-on dictatorship. This we saw with Pharaoh and the ultimate defeat of those that gave up their ability to choose in favor of following their dictator. Here there is clearly a dynamic of both light and darkness in a most profound way. This Yetziat Mitzrayim is often called the leaving of narrow straits. And we also know that it is not complete until we talk about Shavuot, receiving of the law, of the Torah. In other words, it is not just about leaving the slavery that was inflicted on us and all in the kingdom as dictated by one person's choice who thought he was above it all. But our choice must be to make decisions that will honor the ability of all to continue to choose. And we are required to protect that. It is in that vein that we are told 36, 2 times 18 times in our Torah, to protect, not to hurt, not to oppress the stranger, the other. We are told, you must love the other as yourself and do all the actions that are inherent in expressing that. Here is where the discipline enters the equation. And God is here to maintain that. So that we as humans are not overtaken by, nor do we admire or follow those who get lost in their own hubris. They, drunk with their own power, too often forget about the rights of others to choose. Here is where we use that spiritual light in each of us to work against and to walk through the darkness that surrounds so many too much of the time. I will close with continued prayers for healing of our way too fractured world, and hope that we all continue to use our choice, continue to find strength, and use our power to choose for good, finding the light where those that don't do these things get lost in the darkness, and that we use the light, that spiritual light, to overcome the physical challenges in our way, to bring the light of goodness and life to ourselves and others. May you all have a restful and meaningful Shabbat. Lehitraat.